Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the second seminar in the UWE St. Augustine Faculty of Law Research Seminar Series. Welcome back to those of you who joined us last week. And welcome to those of you who are joining us for the first time. We're so happy that you are here with us. And I am very happy to welcome our speakers for today, both very eminent women in their field, and we are so privileged to hear their experiences today. So we will have Sarah Harris with us. She is from JIPLP and JWELB, journals that you all may be familiar with. And if you're not, you need to get familiar with them because they are very important in the fields of IP as well as oil and gas. As you know, we have a strong presence in terms of IP that we are continuing to build with our IP blog, and we want to do further research in this area. Additionally, considering we are located in Trinidad and Tobago, our oil and gas industry is something that we also want to be doing more research on. And of course, with the expertise of our new dean, we are definitely going to aim to make strides in this area. So Sarah is going to be giving us advice on what to do and what not to do when you're publishing a journal article. So this is for anyone, even if you're not publishing in those areas. She's going to give us an overview of things you should be doing and things that you don't want to be doing. And this is going to be really important, especially for those of us who are just getting into publishing, or even those of us who have a lot of experience. And sometimes you wonder maybe, well, why didn't this journal article get accepted, or what could I do next time to make it better? She's going to be able to give us that perspective. Then we're going to hear from Roberta Bassi from Heart. Now, I am extremely excited to hear from Roberta as well, because I am currently in the process of trying to turn my thesis into a monograph, and she's been very helpful in this process. And she's going to give us all this advice as to what we should be doing, because as I have learned in the past year, a monograph, is very different from the thesis. So there are certain changes that have to be made that many of us who finish PhDs might not be aware about until we enter that. So the format for today is 20 minutes presentation per speaker, followed by 10 minutes questions. I will be moderating the questions. You can feel free to put them in the chat at any time, but I will then direct them after the presentation has been done. Of course, within that 10-minute question period, you are free to raise your hand and ask a question via your mic as well. So we're going to start off with Sarah today. So Sarah, you can now proceed to introduce yourself and share your screen, please. And I'm very excited to hear your presentation.
There we are. Can everyone see my screen there?
Yes.
Okay, good, great. So thank you for the very nice welcome, Emma. It's a real honour for me to be here. So I am, as you said, the managing editor of JIPLP, the Journal of IP Law and Practice, and the commissioning editor of JWELB, the Journal of World Energy Law and Practice. My background is in law, my academic background, but I've actually spent my entire career in law publishing with some of the major players, Sweet and Maxwell, Walters Kluwer, and now OUP. I'm also a lawyer linguist on the side, and I do some legal translation from French to English. I've been involved with JIPLP since its inception 16 years ago, and the commissioning editor for JWELB for the last 10 years. So I really hope I'm going to be able to give you some quite practical tips that are going to help you in your quest for publication. I'm going to begin by talking about factors that are outside our control, because it's important to acknowledge that there are some of those and not to be too disheartened. Then I'll spend more time looking at factors that are in our control, things that we can do to help the process, and then providing a few ideas regarding best practice post-acceptance. And finally, as Emma said, we'll have a bit of time for questions at the end. So, as I said, there are definitely some factors that are outside of our control. And there, may be very simple things such as the journal has already covered the topic in question. For example, if there's a new big piece of legislation or a really big exciting case, inevitably we're likely to receive lots of submissions on the same topic. And, we might be able to publish 5 or 6 of those approaching the issue from different angles, but eventually the topic will inevitably become exhausted. So I suppose the advice there is to get in quickly if there is a big new development that you'd like to cover. Otherwise, the journal may simply be overwhelmed with submissions generally. For example, it did happen during the first lockdown, the first half of 2020, that my journals, in common with, I think, most other journals, received a massive spike in submissions. And, you know, at some points, it might be the case that there just is such a backlog that the journal doesn't have space for any more submissions, particularly if a topic's likely to be time sensitive and go out of date before the journal has had an opportunity to publish it. Finally, it might simply be that your paper just isn't a good fit for that particular journal. So it's a question of doing your research to find the right journal, and I'll hopefully give you a few more tips about that. So here, my main message really is, don't be disheartened. It really is a case of finding the right match. And, you know, at the end of the day, we are all actually on the same page here. We have, I would say we have a shared objective, because people in my position, you know, it's my role to fill the journal. In the case of JIPLP, for example, we publish 12 issues a year, often with 20 or so papers per issue. So it's quite a lot of content to source. So it's in my interest for it to work out. You know, I think me and editors of journals shouldn't necessarily be viewed as barriers to publication, although, you know, on occasion, you know, it might sometimes seem that way. But really, it's in all of our interests for this to work out. So now I'm going to talk in a bit more detail about the factors that I think that we can control. I'd like to preface this by saying that none of this is rocket science. It really is quite basic, and I hope it's not too basic. You know, I certainly don't want to patronize anyone, but in my experience, it's surprising how many people don't do these quite basic things. And I think if they did, it would lead to, you know, a happier outcome all around. So the first point is first impressions. They really, really do count. And it's important to comply with the requirements of the journal. At this point, it might be worth me mentioning that, you know, contrary to what you might think, behind the scenes with, well, certainly the journals I'm involved with, there isn't an enormous team of editors working away behind the scenes. So really the onus, and I think this has changed actually in the last 15 or so years since I've worked on certainly on JIPLP, the onus is increasingly on the author. We don't have a large budget for big, you know, major interventionist editing and copy editing at our end. So it's really important that when you first submit, you create the right first impression and comply with the specific requirements for the journal. So firstly, make sure you submit in the right manner. For my journals, we require submissions via Scholar One. Other journals might use other online platforms. And again, other journals might just ask you to email a Word document to whatever email address. But do make sure that you submit in the right way. And it should be easy to find out what that method should be from the website. Then make sure that you comply with what the journal's asking you to do. For example, the abstract for JIPLP, we require the abstract to be formatted in a particular way. And it just looks good if you've already taken the time to do that before you make the submission. We also have templates that apply to certain of our papers. Current intelligence papers have to fit quite a formulaic template. And again, it's set out on the website. Also with referencing, it's good if you can comply with the style of referencing required from the outset. We use Scholar, and I think that's probably the case for many law journals, although obviously there's the Harvard citation system as well, but we certainly use Scholar. And then very simply, just please make sure that things like grammar and spelling are really polished. Depending on the language that you're seeking to publish in, if it isn't your native language, it is a good idea to pay a professional to at least give a read read what you've written. Because, as I said, first impressions really do count, and it's in the interest of the editors for the process to run as smoothly as possible. And if they can see immediately that an article is going to require a lot of work, then it's clearly going to be less appealing and less likely to be accepted for publication. The second point here, and I've put this in capital letters because I really do think it's absolutely the most important thing in any writing, is the audience. When I was at school, my English teacher said to me that basically what I've just said, that with any writing, the key to getting it right is to consider your audience. And, you know, it's a very simple piece of advice, but it's really stayed with me because I think it's really, really important. And it's also, if you don't lose sight of that, it's going to help you to make your writing the best it can be. You know, this sounds slightly odd, but make sure you're not writing for yourself here. The objective isn't to show everybody all the amazing things you know, but to provide some analysis and insight that's going to be of interest to them. Now, aligned to that, do make sure that you tailor your submission to the specific journal. And clearly, that's, you know, the audience is going to be defined by which journal you're submitting to. JIPLP and JWELB are quite good examples because JIPLP is an independent journal. It's owned and published by OUP and has its own team of editors, whereas JWELB is published on behalf of the AIPN, the Association of International Petroleum Negotiators. So it's what's known as a society journal. So there's an additional stakeholder there, the AIPN, which is going to be directing the voice, if you like, of the journal. But that also provides a good clue in terms of the audience, in that the journal is specifically for AIPN members. They all receive a copy with their membership. It does have a wider readership too, but that is the core audience. So it's always worth bearing that audience in mind when you produce your article. Again, very much linked to that is what I've called do not recycle. And specifically there, and I think Roberta will be talking about this in more detail, I'm talking about recycling essays or theses and trying to change them into articles. And again, I think this comes back to the audience. Because if you're writing an essay to be examined, your audience is the examiner. Your aim is to show the examiner everything you know. Whereas if you then want your article to be published for a wider readership, the aims and needs of this new readership are going to be slightly different. So do bear that in mind. And I think it's a bit lazy, to be honest, when people just submit an essay without making any adjustments. So, you know, it might be as simple as looking at the journal website, going back to what I said about first impressions and requirements, and making a few adjustments to your essay so that it works for this new readership. The next tip is, Emma and I have talked about this, and I know there's possibly conflicting advice around, but my view is that it's not good to submit wholesale, i.e. to submit the same paper to multiple journals at the same time. And I would say it's a bit like the CV analogy. If you're applying for 100 jobs and you just spam 100 organisations and send a CV in a 2-line cover letter, you know, I think that immediately whoever the recruiter is going to see that that's what you're doing. And so I think it's more flattering for the recruiter, or in this case, the editor, if they think that you're specifically writing this for them and their audience, and B, and perhaps more importantly, some journals, including JWELB and JIPLP, will only consider a submission if it hasn't been published elsewhere, submitted elsewhere, currently under consideration by another journal. And we actually ask you to tick a box indicating that that's not the case on the submissions portal. And also later, when you're asked to sign the license, we require a copyright license, and you have to warrant that this is an original piece of work and hasn't been published elsewhere. Next, I suggest that you do cooperate during the editorial process. And in my experience, editors vary in their level of willingness to engage during this process. Some editors are very happy to engage in a lot of, dialogue to help you to get your article exactly right. Other editors are busier and are less, less willing to do that. But still, inevitably, there will be a peer review process, and there will therefore be some communication between you and the editor. Certainly for both JIPLP and JWELB, it's quite rare for an article to be accepted for publication without any feedback from the peer reviewer. I think often actually peer reviewers probably feel, even if an article's absolutely fantastic, they love it, they kind of feel a bit duty bound to provide some kind of feedback to prove that they have added some value. So always bear that in mind and take it on board. Obviously, if you don't agree with it, that's one thing, and there might be a need for some dialogue, but I think cooperating with the editor is really crucial. And as I alluded to at the beginning, do check the website. A lot of this information is on the website, but it's amazing how many people don't actually read very basic instructions. And as I said, none of this is rocket science, and I hope it's helpful and not too basic, but it's surprising how many people don't do these things, or do the things that I've suggested should be avoided. Now next, assuming that your excellent article has been accepted for publication, as I said earlier, there isn't going to be a big team at the publisher end. Yes, of course, there are copy editors, typesetters, but still there isn't a large capacity for things to be very fiddly, let's say. So it's just really good if you can do everything that's asked of you in a timely manner. It's a real shame when an article's been accepted and it's allocated to issue 1, for example, and then the author disappears and we can't get hold of the license, we can't get hold of the proofs. And it's a shame because the article's ready to go, but it's kind of stuck in the system. And it also causes us problems in that it, on occasion will hold up the entire issue. So please do respond in a timely manner. With OUP, they're very hot on licenses. Nothing can be published without a signed license, and you'll be sent. It's all automated. You'll be sent the license to sign electronically. I've referred here to OAN standard. I'm not going to go into open access and standard licenses. It might be a topic for a different seminar, but I just wanted to say that whether you're going down the open access route or a standard license, i.e. where your paper is going to be held behind a paywall in a subscription journal, it really shouldn't make any difference to your experience. But nevertheless, you're going to have to decide which route you're going to go down. And then checking and returning proofs. Again, this often is an automated process, and it's just really good and helpful if you can check proofs and return them as quickly as possible. That leads me on to the next point. please don't introduce major changes after acceptance or at proof stage. Inevitably, there might be the occasional update or correction of errors, but proof stage really isn't the time to add a new section on X, Y, or Z, because that just causes a headache for the typesetters and the pagination. And finally, just continue to engage with the editorial team. You don't know where it might lead. You know, depending on your objective, it may well lead to other opportunities, from being commissioned to write another article, being asked to peer review. We're always looking for peer reviewers, because obviously it's, you know, it's a kind of behind the scenes, possibly thankless task where there's not a lot of glory, but it's, you know, a crucial element of a well-running peer-reviewed journal and an essential element. So you may be asked to join our team of peer reviewers. You may even make it onto the editorial board, or even become the editor one day. Both of the JIPLP editors, their first involvement with the journal was actually when they made submissions many years ago. So, as I say, you really don't know where it might lead. Now, that was all that I wanted to say in the presentation. As I say, I really hope it wasn't too basic. None of this is really rocket science, but I'd welcome any questions.
Thank you, Sarah. I think that was really useful, and you're correct. It's not rocket science, but it is things that we need to take in consideration before we end up getting ourselves rejected for something simple that we could have done differently. For example, proper formatting, proper use of our scholar, proper consideration of your audience. And as you mentioned, Sarah, we talked about the submission to one or multiple journals before, and it was really enlightening to me to hear your view on this, because I recently started looking into publishing in the US, and I realized through their centralized system, you could submit to many journals at one time. So then I was unsure as to whether that is what is expected. Then I saw some journals do like the you submit to one at a time and you tailor it to that journal. I'm getting the feeling, based on talking to different people, that UK and EU journals prefer an exclusive review process, and some US journals are open, but they will specifically say if they have an exclusive process. And similarly, the US, I suppose, if you are submitting to multiple, you have to have a tailored cover letter. And the cover letter experience was something very interesting to me. So I'm very much learning as I go. So I really appreciate you giving your views on this. So we will have it's time for questions now. So who has questions? You can put it in the chat. You can feel free to raise your hand. Well, those are the two methods. So yes, let me know and I will direct the questions to Sarah. Sarah, in the meantime, thank you so much for sharing that with us. I am hoping to publish more JIPLP in the future once I get all my research plans in order, drawing on what we learned in last week's seminar on research plans. Of course, I did the presentation on organizing your research, so I have that part down. It's more of a overall holistic research plan I'm looking to create now. So now is the time to take any questions from anyone.
I'll stop sharing my screen now.
Yeah, sure.
Sorry.
Oh, I see the Dean has his hand up. Dean, yes.
Thank you. So very good and clear presentation. And I was just wondering, Sarah, two points. One, that you know, to me, I don't really discern between US journals and EU journals, or, you know, Asian journals. I think journals have become global, and there is global representation, let's say, on the editorial boards of journals today. Except maybe I do note that there's a missing Caribbean presence on the Journal of World Energy Law and Business. Maybe it can be rectified soon.
Yeah, absolutely.
But and Caribbean, South American, let's say. But I was just wondering your views on publishing going going forward that that distinction really between these regional divisions of journals, to me, it seems to be disappearing. And in light of that, I was just wondering, when you get an article to your journal, do you expect that they also have, the author has identified that, you know, this is there is a research gap here, there is previous research by this journal? Because just sometimes when I've acted as a reviewer, I'm amazed that the article has referenced absolutely no research from the journal, and I would be just there thinking, I have read research on this topic from the journal, and I mean, sometimes I think it's, I have a question: is it lazy scholarship that they, you know, maybe they thought that their article was suited for another journal, it got rejected somewhere else, and they're just shoving it into another journal without updating the article to show some, let's say, respected due consideration to previous research in that journal.
Yeah, I mean, possibly, but I think the point I'd make there is that if the research exists and they were originally submitting to a different journal, they should be citing the research from the other journal anyway. You know, I think, you know, it does happen that we, as I said, you know, we'll receive multiple articles on the same topic. And I suppose if it's a very recent issue and, you know, we can't accuse people of lazy scholarship if everything's very new. But certainly, I think if there should be an expectation that they're citing research from all the sources, regardless of where the original intended destination was.
Okay, thank you for that, Sarah. And I see Alex has her hand up.
Yes, so because there are just a small number of journals within the Caribbean, I find that a lot of people tend to try to get their articles published in European journals or American journals. My question is, if your article has a explicitly Caribbean perspective, does that lower its chances of being published in those journals?
Well, I think inevitably any article has to have an interest, you know, it has to have a broad interest. So there might be occasions where an article is deemed to be too niche. But again, I think in a way, it's back to this issue of the audience. If you are writing about a very specific aspect of Caribbean law with this wider audience in mind, then that should help you to pitch it at the right level to have appeal to that wider readership. And certainly in both JIPLP and JWELB, we do publish articles on, you know, very small, very specialist topics, because, you know, at the end of the day, our readers are specialists. So you know, it's what we're looking for is specialist material rather than a basic description of trademark law, for example. So I think my answer is, if you consider that wider audience, there's no reason why a very specific aspect of Caribbean law wouldn't be of interest to the journal's audience.
Great, thank you, Sarah. And I see Malcolm's hand is up, so we'll give Malcolm the last question.
Okay, so originally Alex had my question, but that's fine, because now my follow-up question would be, what do you think would be necessary for us to create bigger journals, or at least create a bigger forum for Caribbean students to have papers published within the region for the region? Because this idea of trying to write things that are necessary for our region, but then still need to tie them to some other external jurisdiction, it seems like it's going to be a lot of a problem. So do you have any tips like that we could use as scholars to try to build like a base here?
Well, I see. I mean, that's a good question. I don't really have a very thought out answer, but I don't think you necessarily need to tie what you're writing to a different jurisdiction. And indeed, I mean, I'm quite a fan of comparative law. That's my background, and I love that. Whereas certainly one of the editors in JIPLP, she's really not keen on articles that are written in comparative perspective. She would much rather that you just focused on whatever it is in your own system, rather than trying to draw some sort of parallels with other legal systems. So I think you just need to, I suppose, just be confident in the quality of your research and what you want to say, but just make sure that you never lose sight of who you're writing for.
Okay, thank you very much, Sarah. So seeing the importance of, I think we're seeing the importance of audience and who it is that you're trying to direct the article to. So I think what would also be helpful is probably seeing, well, which journal, what is the readership of the journal? Maybe even like which databases is the journal accessible through? Is it open access, as you mentioned, or is it a standard paywall license? And all those things would go into consideration. So Malcolm, in terms of creating regional journals, we do have plans of the faculty. So we will be getting on that, but I think Sarah's given some very good advice as to how you can still have your, we can have our Caribbean's perspective still published in the foreign journals as well. And in fact, that can give a benefit because we do want people to know about the law in our region. And yes, Malcolm, I see your chat, you say you have papers and ideas, so that is very good. Great, so thank you so much for that, Sarah.
Sorry, just quickly in response to Malcolm and to anybody else, if you do have papers and ideas, do get in touch with me. I put my email address on the final slide. It's just sarah.harris@oup.com. So please do get in touch, and you know, I'm very happy to answer more questions or talk about specific papers.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and I will share your email address in the chat.
Thank you.
Okay, so now we're going to turn over to Roberta. So I'm just going to stop and restart the recording. And Roberta, you can put up your slides, please. So thank you so much for that, Sarah.